think we're live.
Excellent. It's always good to go live
Yes, it's always like you're waiting for the little spinner
because you
to
never
say.
know what the connection and
Exactly.
when
Exactly.
it'll start. So
Yeah.
we're live, and that's awesome.
Live and hopefully audible.
Yes, yes. If you notice that there's warbling in our voices or if the sound is a little off, let us know right away in the chat.
Because we'll fix it.
Right, we will.
So, what's our topic today?
Today's topic is handling criticism and how do you respond to criticism? How do you deal with criticism? Because that's a really tricky one,
Right.
right?
So, receiving criticism?
Yeah. How do you receive criticism and then respond to it
Yeah.
in the appropriate way?
Yeah. It's a very important skill because criticism, at least criticism that's intended to be helpful, can be very constructive in terms of helping get you on track, improving and refining your delivery. If it's particularly in communication, often criticism has a lot to do with how do you deliver it? Do you deliver it clearly? Do you deliver it politely? Do you deliver it empathetically?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So in this context, we can definitely talk about in another lesson sort of how do you give criticism. That's a separate topic. But today's topic is really focusing on once you receive the criticism and however you received it, if it was in a nice way, in a polite way, or if it was in sort of an abhorrent way, right? How do you respond? How do you then, come back to the person and look at them in the eye and tell them your 2 cents, right?
Right.
Because it's really hard. It's really hard. I mean, we don't necessarily like criticism. If you treat it as a constructive type of criticism, which is what you touched upon, Greg, then we can change our mindset about it and our perspective on it. So that's really important. But today we're talking about once you receive that criticism, what are you supposed to make of it?
Got it. Yeah. And again, I think the ability to receive criticism is very important, not just because, well, let's say first because,
Yeah.
um, you know, learning how to receive it can help you process it efficiently and effectively so that you can actually learn from it. And then the second thing is if you don't receive it well, then you can turn off the people from ever giving you criticism in the future. And that's shutting off an opportunity to get constructive feedback, right? And so I think a person who's good at receiving criticism is likely to get more of it in a way that helps them get better at what they do.
That's a really good point. So I love that because that helps us see it more of an opportunity for growth, right? An opportunity to
Yes.
improve. So let's backtrack a sec and start thinking about ways of once you receive the criticism, what do you do internally? So in communication, there's the intrapersonal communication aspect and then the interpersonal communication aspect. So we focus on both of these things here. So at Explearning. So we focus on both of these things. And in the beginning, so when you take that criticism, think about if there's any kernel of truth in that. Is there anything that could be valid? Is there any merit to that criticism? And one of the best ways to know if that is the case, if you yourself were aware of it in the process of, let's say, filing a report for which you got criticism about
Right.
how you filed it. Let's say in the moment you weren't really feeling it. So that's one way, if you were aware of that you weren't in your best,
Kind of were you expecting
state.
it?
Exactly. Like,
Right.
were you expecting it? But the other way is to sort of see from other people if you've received that same type of criticism in other, scenarios, in other situations. So let's say it's not about the filing of the report. It's about maybe sloppy email writing, right? You've written an email in haste and you sent it off without really double checking. Maybe there's some spelling errors, right? That kind of thing. So maybe multiple people over the years have sort of dinged you for that. That's another way to know if there is any kernel of truth in that. Is there any,
Right. Identifying
valid...
some kind of consistent pattern in the feedback that you're getting.
Exactly. So that way we know if it's just, if there's some truth to it, or if it's just an ad hominem, an attack on us as a person as opposed to on the work.
Right. And
Right?
and actually, just so that we're clear,
Yeah.
when we're saying criticism, are we really talking about feedback, or are we talking about input that can be intended to be purely critical versus constructive?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's really about how the receiver of the criticism, and I'm putting that in quotes because it could be feedback, or it could be actually an ad hominem, an attack on the person. It's all about how you treat it. So if you were to treat it as criticism, and you were to take offense to
Mhm.
it, then that's one thing, right? If the criticism is more of, some feedback, some you could do this, it would be nice if, that kind of thing, I think it's more of the feedback. But the criticism, I feel like it's inherently, you know, there's some, like, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit of like friction to it, right?
Right.
So it's all about how we interpret it.
You're right. I mean, for one person delivering it, they may be delivering it, and in their minds, they're saying, I'm delivering feedback here.
Yeah.
Right. And so in their minds, it's feedback, and it's neutral, and it's intended to be helpful and constructive. On the other hand, you could have the person who's receiving it listen, and in their minds, they're like, this person's attacking me.
Right.
Right. There's not a kernel of truth in this. There's no merit to it.
Yeah.
And, um, they're trying to bring me down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that is an example of how what to one person is feedback, to the other person can be an attack.
Totally.
Right. And I know today we're focusing on the reception side, so we'll focus on that. Um, the most important thing, as you were saying earlier, is the mental framing of
Yes.
your reception, right? So, regardless of how it's delivered to you, you still have the power to categorize it as an attack or feedback, right? And to the extent that you can sort of guide your reception of it, right? Steer your reception toward the feedback end of the spectrum, you're more likely to be able to process it in a productive way. And that's where you can decide as you're processing, is there any truth to this? And we are saying, is there any consistency? Have I heard this before? If this is coming out of the blue, I've never heard it before, and it doesn't really align with my personality, well, then maybe it isn't something I need to focus on.
Exactly.
On the other hand, if this is something that I've heard before and it's perhaps even something I'm working on, great. Here's another data point in terms of where I am versus where I want to be.
Absolutely. No, and it's true. And the other way to sort of look at it is, if you know that there's not much merit to it, and there's not even a kernel of truth to it, then knowing that, you can sort of challenge the critic and
Mm.
say, all right, thanks for the feedback. Or you don't even have to say that if you really don't feel like thanking them for it. Could you elaborate on this? Could you provide some evidence? Could you give me an anecdote? In other words, point out the actual instances
Or
of,
get them to.
yes,
Yeah.
sloppy email writing, poor report filing, whatever it is that they're criticizing you for. And if they can't come up with anything, well, then there's your answer right there, right? So challenge them. Ask them, okay, well, thank you. Could you tell me? Could you walk me through, where in this email you found it to be sloppily written?
Yeah, I think the more specific you can get with the feedback that's being delivered to you, the more effective you can make it, right?
Yeah.
I think, uh, at the same time, you don't want to, again, off as aggressive. If you confront the person and say, "Oh yeah, where's your proof?" Right? If you come at it like that, um, it's going to put them on the defensive, and it sets the wrong tone for the rest of the conversation.
Right. You want to do it in a nice way.
Right.
Like,
So
could you
collaborative
show
way.
me where?
It's a collaborative, right?
Exactly.
So, oh, that's interesting. I didn't pick up on that. Is there anywhere in particular that you saw that way I can sort of calibrate my
Exactly.
my process accordingly.
Right. So in your mind, you're thinking about, well, show me the proof, show me the evidence. But of course, in your delivery, you're polite but firm, right? We want to stand our ground. We want to be assertive with this because otherwise, you know, what's the point of standing up for yourself? You have to stand up for yourself. So that's a really interesting way of sort of looking at it. I'm wondering what the audience thinks. What do the Explearning community members think about the way of receiving criticism and how you've dealt with criticism in the past? I want to hear from you. So let us know
Yeah.
now if you think of anything, if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, in particular situations where it's not clear to you, whether it's criticism
Or
or
feedback.
or feedback, right? And I think
Yeah.
those are the opportunities you have to then make a conscious choice to say this is feedback. It may be intended to be hurtful. It may intend to be, in some way bringing me down. But I'm choosing to interpret it as feedback, and I'm going to use it as a potential learning opportunity to see, are there ways that I can improve on whatever it is I'm getting feedback on,
Definitely.
right?
Yeah, I think that's the best thing for you to actually, regardless of their intention and the intent behind the criticism or the feedback, however you want to describe it or label it, if you can just treat it as something that will be constructive and you treat it as a teachable moment, as a learning opportunity, you are so far beyond most people in terms of how they receive it, right? Instead of looking at it as a negative, look at it as, of course, if there's truth to it, right? Let's caveat it with that. Look at it as an opportunity to grow and improve and get maybe better at email writing or filing reports or whatever it might be in the
Yeah.
moment.
It's funny because early on in my academic career, I was really nervous about people reading my writing, right?
Mm,
So I would write a paper or something, and we had all these free resources in terms of the Writing Center,
yeah.
right? And peer reviewing. People can read and provide their feedback on my writing. And I would never bring my papers in. I just
Mm,
wouldn't. And as a result, I would get worse grades. And eventually, one of the teacher, started forcing us to actually use the Writing Center. This was actually in college.
right.
And so I brought them in, and I remember being so incredulous, walking in there like, they think they can improve my writing. What is this? Like, I know what I'm trying to write here. And so I handed in, and we just go through it together. And I have to say, uh, I was so wrong about how it could help,
Right.
right? I went in there with this idea that no one knows my writing better than I do, so how can
Mm,
they help? What they ended up doing is really helping me understand, how am I framing my argument, right? How am I positioning the points that I'm trying to make?
right.
And what makes sense to me, what I realized
Hmm.
is that what makes sense to me doesn't necessarily make sense to someone else, right?
Right.
The way I frame it, I get it because that's the way
You're
my
in
mind
your
works,
head and you're
right?
in your own head.
But effective communication, effective writing, effective speech has much more to do with packaging something in a way that a broad group of people get it, right? A wide range of people.
Totally. Yeah.
And you can't get that kind of input without getting feedback, right? You at the end of the day, you don't know how other people perceive what it is you're saying or writing uh, without getting their feedback. And so that's why I think developing this aptitude for receiving feedback can be so powerful,
Right.
because at the end of the day, what it can help you do is speak with more clarity, write with more clarity. And when you do that, the world becomes a brighter place because suddenly things that you want to make sense to people do make sense to them.
Right. And it can help with building an argument, like being persuasive in your communication. But getting another person's perspective is also, I mean, that's what you were getting at with the Writing Center, right? It's really important to add that dimension,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of time we have, the blinders on, right? And that's just sometimes how it is. right? So we have to sort of step outside of that, take off the blinders, and allow other perspectives in, because that provides a more enriching experience and also a more fulfilling existence as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
One thing that I came across, so many of you might be familiar with the amazing and epic series Battlestar Galactica. We're big fans. And one of my favorite characters, she's one of the main protagonists on the show, is Kara Thrace. She goes by Starbuck. That's her call name because she's a Viper
Pilot.
pilot. So she goes on a lot of adventures. Anyway, the actual actress is also a really cool person.
Like in real life.
In real life, and she has her own YouTube channel. I'll link it below because it's fun. Like, she does a lot of different like social experiments. She'll do just, she's an entertainer, so she always says that she wants to make people laugh. She wants to entertain people, and she's just very authentic and genuine. So I personally also really like the actress herself. And I was listening to a podcast that she was on the other day, and she was talking about, she's really into like transcendental meditation, personal growth, wellness, that kind of thing, which definitely aligns to what I'm interested in and what you are as well. So anyway, she's talking about a time when she was actually diagnosed with thyroid cancer in her 20s, and how that really affected her mental state and her worldview. And, that's a big deal. So she was down a lot, which is totally understandable. And she talks about, her process of getting out of that abyss and giving herself time to feel sorry about herself, but then also, making sure she doesn't take away from life that she has right now in this moment.
Right.
Right. So she started playing this game. She created this game called The Three Things. And essentially, what it is whatever situation that you are facing in the moment, be it, criticism, be it something as, banal as being stuck in traffic, but that obviously puts us in a bad mood, right? Because we can't get to our destination super fast. Whatever it might be that is ailing you in the moment, physically or mentally, think about 3 ways that situation could be worse. So, for example, you get you get dinged by your boss because the email was not written up to par.
Right.
Right. So think about, how could that situation have been worse? What are 3 ways that could have been even worse? Maybe you had a migraine in that moment. Maybe you got fired because of it. Maybe, what's another, like, not so good thing from that?
From a email situation?
Like, how could it have been worse?
Right. I mean, your computer could have crashed and you lost all your data.
Okay, right? So those are 3 things that could have happened but did not. So immediately you're forced to be thankful that it was just being dinged for a sloppy email.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So when I listened to that, I was like, this is super powerful, because what it does is it forces you, to get out of your body for a second, right? Look at it from a bird's eye view.
Yep.
And be grateful that it was just that. So like with her thyroid cancer, she said, she was looking at it as, it could have been, they caught it early. It's a highly treatable cancer. And, she was young and fit and relatively
Otherwise healthy.
Yeah. So all of these things made it so that she could overcome it, right? And there are so many other ways that it could have been worse. So keep that in mind too when you get criticism, right? And if it's getting you down, and if you find yourself in a negative downward like cycle and spiral, jolt yourself out of it by saying, how could this have been even worse than it actually is?
Yeah, there's actually, that's very much in line with the Stoic philosophy as well, which is putting your situation in perspective of the greater sort of backdrop of suffering, right? Because most of the time, what we're experiencing can be very frustrating in the moment. But when you sort of put in the bigger picture, it's a little blip, and it's not, going to change your life, you know. And in her case, frankly, cancer is a life-changing situation. And even in
Yeah,
that
and what's her
situation,
name? Katie Shakoff.
Katie
Yeah,
Shakoff is her name.
really cool
But
person.
even in her situation, she was able to apply that sort of methodology that to sort of reframe it and keep her spirits up. And I think it is very important in the context of criticism, particularly in the moment of receiving the criticism, because it's so easy when someone's giving you feedback or it could be more aggressive than that. It's so easy to go on the defensive and say, oh but see this, and rationalize why their feedback isn't actually correct. The best thing to do, in my experience, is just to hear it out, right? Your goal at that point isn't to convince them that they're wrong and that you're right. That defeats the purpose. The goal is simply to absorb the information,
Hmm.
and then you can process it on your own time and decide what aspects of it are worth considering and what are worth discarding, right? So when you're receiving the criticism, it's about just gathering the information. It has nothing to do with trying to defend your position or convince the person delivering it of something else, right? You're
Right.
not on the stand here. There's
Yeah.
not like a jury that's going to assess the situation. It's purely for your own benefit.
Hmm.
And so, going back to your strategy, I think by employing something like that while you're receiving criticism,
The three things.
the three
Yeah,
things,
from Starbuck.
right, and
Katie Shakoff.
right, by doing something like that,
Hmm.
you can reduce that sense of defensiveness, right? Because
Definitely.
in your mind, you can say, okay, well, something, they didn't like something I did here, or they have an issue with something I did. It could have been worse. And in this context, I'm actually getting some helpful feedback to maybe improve it.
Definitely. Yeah, I love the idea of listening first, right? Communication is 50% speaking, 50% listening, but it also changes depending on what you're doing. Um, and really trying to receive that,
Mm.
think about it, like sleep on it. Don't respond right away if you can, if there's some time where you can think about it. And then stow it away and then revisit it when you're calmer, right? Because when we hear criticism, we tend to get a little bit tense or riled up or aggressive or defensive, all natural impulses and reactions. But in order to respond properly, we need some time with it, right? And just sit on it, right, for a little while.
Yeah, and that what that gives your body time to do is reset to equilibrium,
Yes.
and your brain can process information much more efficiently
Yeah.
and accurately at that point. In the
Definitely.
moment, it's very hard for you. And earlier you were talking about thanking the person for the feedback. I like that. It may feel a little empty. You may not actually want to receive that feedback,
Yeah.
but I think it is good practice to just thank them for it, because it does two things. One, it uh, demonstrates to them that you're open to feedback generally, so you're
Right.
more likely to get it in the future.
Hmm.
But secondly, it does help frame your mind to be more receptive. If you say thank you, your brain is more likely to think that it's getting something beneficial, right? So it's a
Definitely.
way of sort of tricking your brain. It's the same strategy that I believe is Benjamin Franklin did when he was when he met someone who he didn't get along with.
Yeah. What did he do?
His trick was to ask them for a favor,
Oh, that's
right?
right.
So
Yes.
this person, let's say you don't get along with someone,
Mm.
you ask them to do you a favor, and the act of them doing you a favor gets them to like you more, because in their minds they're thinking, I would only do a favor for someone I like. So if I'm doing them a favor, I must actually like this person. And then secondly, for you, you get to say thank you and be grateful to that person. So it immediately creates this sort of
Rapport.
rapport. And so that same concept, I think, applies to thanking someone when they're giving you feedback,
Yeah.
because it establishes an atmosphere of appreciation and openness that is good fertile soil for a healthy conversation.
I love that. Yeah. Again, with the growing analogies, right? Because it is about growth. It is about growth. So I think that's a really interesting way of sort of dealing with the criticism, and how do you frame it in a way that is actually going to benefit you.
Yeah.
Um, and you also have to keep in mind the venue in which you receive that criticism and what
Mm,
criticism. There was an extra vowel in there that I just ate. You know, I remember, so I feel like this was a while ago, but I was a double major in college, and I had two theses presentations back to back. And one was in French because I was a French major and also a communications major. And so I had my first one was the communications defense. And this one was we were at a podium, and then we had basically a jury. So that's why when you said jury,
right.
it made me think of that. Professors and then also like audience members.
Mm,
And I remember getting asked a really tough question by one of the communication professors.
right.
And it wasn't criticism, but it was definitely putting me on the spot. And I just remember saying thank you. And that really helped me it gave me some thinking time.
Yes.
So, saying thank you so much for that question, or that's a really great question. Um, Gives you time to think, even if it's a couple of seconds. And
Hmm.
then I was able to frame it in a way, and it turned out it was a little bit out of the scope of what I had researched, but she asked it anyway because it was a really good question. So that helped. So my point here is when you get criticism on the spot, when all eyes are on you and you're at the podium and people are waiting for your answer, really be careful. Control how you react to that, right? You might first be so taken aback and startled by that you like freeze up or you get really angry and really like red in the face. Um, but avoid that, right? Try to be as calm as you can.
Yeah.
And then, thank them and say, if you hadn't even thought of that, say it, right? If you hadn't researched that specific thing, then say, that's a really good point. I'm going to revisit that.
See if I can get some clarity. Right.
Exactly. Right. So you don't have to do anything specifically with that criticism, even when you are on the spot, right? It's really more about how you react to it.
Exactly. It is all about receiving it. Um, Yasmin had a very good question
Hmm.
about um, receiving criticism cross generationally, right?
Oh,
So, in my context, if I was receiving criticism from someone who was, you know, several decades older than I was,
okay.
or younger,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, we're at
How do you
that
do
age,
that?
right?
And I think that's a really good point, and something that
Mm.
you want to pay attention to because, um, when you're receiving criticism, who is it that's delivering it, right? What's
Yes.
their frame of mind? And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier about uh, getting feedback is an exercise in understanding how other people see or perceive what you're saying, right? And in particular, when you span different generations have very different perspectives on the same situation. Um,
Yeah, true.
and right, and so you know when you're receiving it from someone from a different generation, expect that it's going to be a little different
Right.
from the way that you typically think about things, and don't let that catch you off guard. Right? I
Mm.
think you're more likely to disagree with a cross generational piece of feedback
Hmm.
because it's the thinking behind it will be so different from the way you think about it.
Right.
But if your audience has people from a different generation, right? If you're trying to speak to people from a different generation
Then your own.
than your own,
Yeah.
or to a broad set of generations,
Mm.
then that's actually really valuable feedback because it'll help you realize that the way you're framing it might make sense to people your age, but
Yeah.
not necessarily to people of different ages.
Yes.
So I think getting cross generational feedback is actually incredibly valuable
Yeah.
because it does give you a fresh perspective on what it is you're trying to convey.
Right.
And the most important thing with it is to decide, okay, now that I see this is how someone from a different generation sees it, is that important for what I'm trying to do?
Mm.
And if it is, if you are trying to speak across generations, then that's really helpful feedback that you should incorporate. If it's not relevant to your audience, okay, that's fine, but it's still worth keeping in mind as you deliver it because it can still, help develop concepts that you're trying to articulate.
I love that. And then again, it's enriching your experience and your perspective and ultimately your worldview. And it's about getting out of the echo chamber,
Right.
right? Because with the echo chamber, you
Yeah.
get basically information, points of views, perspectives from people who are like-minded and from the same generation, maybe, right? So it's really nice to enrich that scope by broadening the horizon, so to speak, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we're actually running up on our time limit. I think in terms of summarizing the conversation here,
Yeah, there was a lot in there.
there was. Um, it's that criticism is an opportunity to learn and grow, and in order to make the best of it, uh, you as the person, the recipient of the criticism, have the opportunity to frame it in a way that's constructive, right? Regardless of how it's delivered, that's not something you can control. But what you can control is how you receive it. And so if you can receive it and get your mind in a mindset that says, this is potentially useful information, let me process it, right? So if you can be in that receptive mindset, you're much more likely to be able to derive value from it. And in the process of receiving it, right, it's not about defending your position. It's
Right.
not about convincing them that they're wrong.
Right.
It's all about collecting the information. Then you could process it on your own time and make your own decision about whether or not it's worth acting on.
Exactly. And be mindful of the way you might react. So if you know that you're a reactive person, take time with that, sit on it, stow it away, think about it, and then respond when you're calm and serene. So there's so much to say about this. There was more strategies in our lesson that we put out earlier this week. You'll see it up on the blog and also on the channel page on YouTube. So let us know what you think. Try out these strategies. What work for you? What do you feel like you could be doing
Mhm.
to help you deal with the criticism in real life or online? Who knows,
Yeah,
right?
we always love hearing,
It's both.
other people's approaches too, because there are many, and what works for some people doesn't work as well for others. So
Right.
it's
And
all about finding sort of what fits for you.
yeah, and I love when I see, we get comments and we respond to all of them. And I also love it when the explorers comment on things that other people have commented on. That's
Yeah.
just really community building. So I love that. So really encourage that
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
that's it. I mean, it's not just about asking us questions. You guys have valuable insights as well, and so
Yeah,
please do share them with each other, and that's what makes the community valuable.
exactly. So thank you for everyone who joined this live stream. Thank you for your comments. I see some action over in the interactive chat. So thank you. And to those of you watching the replay later on, thank you as well. And we will see you next week for our next lesson and our next live stream.
Yes, looking forward to it. Have a great weekend, guys.
Happy exploring, everyone.